Ask most people to name the most powerful company in America, and you'll hear the same few answers. Apple, Google, maybe a bank. Lately, if they've been online, they'll say BlackRock. The firm half the internet is now convinced runs the world. And BlackRock is enormous. But it is not the biggest owner of corporate America. The company that holds that title has no famous founder you'd recognize, runs almost no advertising, and has spent 50 years being deliberately, professionally boring. It owns a piece of nearly every large company you can name. The airline you flew, the bank that holds your mortgage, the company that makes your phone. And here's the part that makes it genuinely strange. It may be partly owned by you, and you'd never know it. Its name is Vanguard. By the end of this, you'll understand how one quiet company ended up sitting at the top of almost every business in the country, not by buying them in some dramatic takeover, but through the most boring financial product ever invented. And you'll understand why that's more unsettling than any villain the internet has tried to hand you. If you find this kind of thing fascinating, tap that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people. Let's get into it. Start with a number, because the number is hard to hold in your head. Vanguard manages around $11.5 trillion. Not millions, not billions, trillion, with enough zeros that the word stops meaning anything. To make it real, if you added up every dollar Vanguard oversees, it would rival the entire annual output of most countries on Earth. And unlike a bank, that money isn't sitting in a vault. It's invested, spread across thousands of companies, in slices, everywhere. But the size isn't the interesting part. Plenty of firms are large. The interesting part is where that money sits and what it quietly gives Vanguard the right to do. Here's the fact that should stop you. Across the 500 largest companies in America, the ones in the S&P 500, the businesses that basically are the American economy, Vanguard or BlackRock sits among the 3 biggest shareholders in every single one. Not most, all of them. And Vanguard alone is the single largest institutional shareholder in the majority of them. Pick a household name, a soda company, a defense contractor, a social network, and there's a very good chance that the biggest voice in its shareholder meetings belongs to the same quiet company in Pennsylvania. We'll get to how they actually use that power in a moment, because that's where the real story is. But first, you need to understand how this even happened, because nobody planned it. There was no midnight deal, no hostile raid. This much ownership of this much of the economy was assembled almost by accident, one boring dollar at a time. Go back to 1975. A man named Jack Bogle starts Vanguard on a simple, almost insulting idea. Most professional money managers, he argued, don't beat the market. They just charge you a fortune to try and fail. So why pay them? Instead of hiring expensive experts to pick winning stocks, why not build a fund that simply buys a little piece of every company in the market and then sit still? No genius stock picking, no fees for brilliance that mostly doesn't exist. Just own everything, cheaply, and wait. This was the index fund. When it launched, Wall Street mocked it. One firm called it un-American. Who would settle for average? Almost everyone, it turned out. Because the boring idea worked. Year after year, the cheap fund that owned everything quietly beat the expensive funds that tried to be clever. And as ordinary people figured that out, as your retirement account, your pension, your workplace savings plans slowly moved into index funds, the money didn't just grow. It flowed to the company that had pioneered owning everything, Vanguard. And this is the mechanism, the thing to really understand, because it's the whole story. When you put money into an index fund, that fund has to go buy a slice of every company in the index. It doesn't get to decide it likes one company and dislikes another. It buys them all. So every time a paycheck somewhere in America lands in a 401k and gets swept into an index fund, a few more cents of ownership in nearly every major company quietly transfers to Vanguard's column. Multiply that by decades, by tens of millions of workers, and you don't get a conspiracy, you get an accumulation. The most concentrated ownership of the American economy in a century was built not by greed or genius, but by millions of people making the sensible, responsible choice to save cheaply, including, quite possibly, you. Which brings us to the question I promised we'd come back to. Owning a slice of everything is one thing, but what does that ownership actually let them do? Here's what most people don't realize. When you own shares in a company, you don't just own a sliver of its profits. You own a vote. A say in who runs it, how much the executives get paid, what the company is allowed to do. And when you're the largest shareholder in company after company after company, those votes stack up into something that doesn't really have a name. Not ownership exactly. Influence. Leverage. A permanent seat at a table you were never elected to sit at. Think about what that means at scale. Vanguard is a top shareholder in competing airlines. All of them. Competing banks, all of them. The same quiet company holds a deciding block of votes in businesses that are supposed to be at war with each other for your money. Economists have a bloodless name for this: common ownership. The worry is simple. If the same few owners sit atop every airline, how hard do those airlines really compete to lower your fare? Nobody has to send a secret instruction. The incentive is just there, built into the structure. And it's not a fringe concern. Regulators and researchers have been quietly circling this question for years because it touches almost every price you pay. So by now you might have decided you found the villain. A single company, unelected, holding the deciding votes over the entire economy. It's a clean story. It's also, and I want to be honest with you, because this channel is about how money actually works, not how it feels, not the whole truth. Because here's the twist the villain story leaves out. Vanguard is not owned by a founder getting rich. It has no outside shareholders, no billionaire pulling strings from a penthouse. Vanguard is owned by its own funds, and those funds are owned by the people who invest in them, which means Vanguard is, structurally, owned by its customers, by ordinary people with index funds. That unusual setup is the entire reason its fees are among the lowest in the world. With no outside owners demanding profit, it runs essentially at cost and hands the savings back to investors. So the most powerful owner in America is, on paper, owned by regular savers, possibly including you. The monster, it turns out, might be wearing your face. And yet, here's why that answer doesn't fully settle it, and why this is genuinely one of the strangest arrangements in modern finance. Being an owner on paper and having power in practice are not the same thing. When your index fund holds a vote at some company's annual meeting, you don't cast it. The fund does. And for decades, the decision of how to vote your slice of nearly every company in America was made by a small in-house team at Vanguard. People you didn't elect, whose names you don't know, exercising the voting power of millions of savers who never picked them and mostly never noticed. You owned the shares. Someone else owned the say. To Vanguard's credit, they've felt the weight of this. In recent years, they've started handing some of that voting choice back, letting index fund investors direct how their share gets voted, across funds holding trillions of dollars. It's a real change, and it matters, but it's also an admission of the thing we started with, that all along, an enormous amount of quiet power over corporate America had pooled in one place, held on behalf of people who had no idea they were holding it. So let's put it back together, because the real story here is stranger and better than the cartoon version. There is no secret cabal. There is no plan to rule the world. What there is a single, quiet company that solved a real problem. The fact that expensive money managers mostly weren't worth it, and in solving it so well for so many people, accidentally became the largest owner of almost every business in America. It didn't seize power. Power accumulated on it, the way snow accumulates on the tallest thing in a field. And the people it holds that power on behalf of, millions of ordinary savers, are the same people who have almost no say in how it's used. That's the thing worth sitting with. The most powerful company in America isn't powerful because it's ruthless or secret or evil. It's powerful because it's boring. And because being boring is exactly what tens of millions of us decided, sensibly, to trust with our futures. We built the giant. We're just not the ones who get to steer it. So I want to know where you land on this. Be honest in the comments. Do you own an index fund? In your 401k? Your pension? Anywhere? Because if you do, you are technically a part owner of half of corporate America. Does that make this whole thing better or worse? Tell me which side you're on. I read the comments and I'll reply. If this changed how you see the boring little fund in your retirement account, hit that like button and subscribe to Crest Royale. This whole channel is about how money and power actually move underneath the story you're usually told. Because here's where it goes next. We just watched how ownership quietly concentrates at the very top. But the way that power actually touches your life changes completely depending on one number, the number in your own account. I broke down exactly how the world treats you at every level of wealth, from a negative balance all the way to $1 billion, and it is not subtle. That's the one to watch next. It's right here.